All right, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. So it's currently March now, and got a few films to catch up on here. On today's stream, we're going to be looking at, of course, the big film that came out this weekend, Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune, the second part of the first book. We'll also be reviewing Problemista, a new drama that it's by oh god, I forgot his name. Julio, I keep mispronouncing his name. Julio Torres. I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher his name there. But it stars Tilda Swinton and it has RZA. It's a very bizarre little film. It's going to be coming. It's in limited release actually right now, and it's actually going to be releasing in a wider release later this year, so that later this month. So that's going to be an early review, and then we'll also catch up on Sony's latest Marvel film, Madam Web. So, without further ado, since it's Dune weekend, we'll get straight to Dune. While I'm getting the text up here, if you like early, like I know Dune was a bit late on it. I watched it like 2 weeks ago, but life caught up. But yeah, Problemista is a early review. So if you'd like more early reviews like this and other movie discussions like this, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel, where I keep up to date on all this stuff. All right, so let's get to my most anticipated film of this year. Although technically it would have been last year, but then it pulled out of the box office at the last minute, which kind of sucked because I was hoping to see it in October. Well, I think it was supposed to release in November, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Yeah, so let's get my notes up here, and we will start talking about Dune here. And in 3, 2, 1. So Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 is the second half of the first book, and Part 1, which came out in 2021, was just like such an amazing adaptation of the book. Like I'd been a big fan of like the book for a while, and you know, I like the David Lynch film, but it's kind of a bit of a mess. Like there's parts of it that I want to love, but it's not as good as it could be like the book. Thankfully, Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune has been it was great with Part 1. And I was greatly looking forward to Part 2 to see how the director could pull it off, and he does beautifully, in a sense of not just like taking a lot from the book, like there's way more in here than what's in the David Lynch film, including like the director's cut, but like just how Villeneuve kind of like sets it up here. Like he makes it like, let's put it this way, I think he's counting on at this point that there will be another Dune film made, because there's way more to continue on with the story, like continuing on into Dune Messiah. And this film, Part 2, clearly sets up the fact that there's going to be more coming, more or less. And even if it doesn't, I still love the way that Part 2 focuses more on kind of like the rise and kind of like the anxiety that's going to come with the eventual fall of Paul Atreides. So, for a little bit of recap. So in Part 1, obviously, Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, had his whole house decimated by the Harkonnens on Arrakis. So now he's gone off to live with the Fremen along with his pregnant mother Jessica, who are the last remaining fragments of the Atreides and probably the only hope of striking back against the Harkonnens and getting revenge, even though Paul is much more about revenge than Jessica at this point. Now, what's fascinating about how Jessica, because Jessica and Paul are both fully ingrained within like the ways of like the Bene Gesserit, and they've studied up a little bit on Arrakis and the Harkonnens, they believe that they're able to kind of pull the strings of spirituality and fundamentalism to kind of like to benefit themselves, to more or less seek out revenge. It becomes more obvious for Paul as the film goes on that he's way deep into revenge, to the point where he's not even like questioning how far he's going to go with it. But questioning that aspect of of his character is a character who's explored a lot more. Like the biggest credit I give to Villeneuve in this film is that he expands on the roles of Jessica and Chani way more, because Chani, played here by Zendaya, who didn't really have a lot to do in the first part, which makes sense because, like, you know, Paul has visions of her and he doesn't really see her until after he's forced out, you know, of the control of her, after his family's been forced out of control of Arrakis. So we get to see a lot of her. And it'd be so easy for her to just be, you know, kind of off to the side and not have as much to say. Whereas in this film, she is very much like a big critique of Paul. Like at first, like, and it, like the build up to it makes sense because like Chani is a part of the Fremen who's very skeptical. Like she doesn't believe in these century-long myths about how like there's going to be a Messiah who's going to come and it's going to save us all, and that there's this, you know, like, you know, just having faith that a Messiah is going to come. She doesn't believe in any of it. So of course, because Paul is more of an outsider and seems a little bit skeptical, she gravitates towards him a little bit. And they do eventually form like the romance that is expected with the story. But it's more fascinating to watch how Chani reacts to when Paul starts taking on bigger leadership roles within the Fremen, and how he kind of like builds himself up more and more. And Chani is just kind of like watching off to the side, realizing he's too far gone. Like, I'm sticking with him because we want the Harkonnens off Arrakis. But she's like, I don't know, this seems like a big gamble here. And I love how the film more or less focuses a lot more on Chani trying to form her own destiny, whereas with Paul, it feels like his destiny's been laid out before him, both by Jessica, who instructs him more on like their Bene Gesserit ways, and also by Stilgar, who, that teaches Paul all about the Fremen and how to survive on Arrakis and how to, be one of the fighters. Basically, how to wage war and how to end up being a leader. Now, there are a lot of parts in this film where, like, I felt it could have faltered. I felt it could have gotten a little bit too distracted by everything else going on, especially with how much ground is covered in part one, because part one jumped around a bit between characters, and I don't really fault the film for that, because it's doing a heavy amount of world building, which is great because then it sets up everything for part two. Because if like part one was mostly about world building, like setting up of Arrakis and the Harkonnens, and the Bene Gesserit, and giving little hints of like the Padishah Emperor. Part two is, it's fully ingrained in exploring, Paul's rise within the Fremen and Chani's skepticism about him, as well as Jessica being a little bit conflicted about how their time with the Fremen is going to be spent. Now, pretty much like everyone who survived from the last film is still back here. Dave Bautista is back as Raban, the nephew of Baron Harkonnen. Gets to do a lot more in this film. He did get to do a little bit, but here he gets to take command and kind of just falter and just have Vladimir Harkonnen just stare him down, and just the way that like for as little screen time as like Dave Bautista, like he gets more screen time in part two than he does in part one, but he makes it worth it. Like he makes Raban this like short fused angry guy who just like, if you say or just look at him the wrong way, he'll snap your neck without even like questioning it. Just a hot-headed, short-fused guy. But I mean, that's kind of what you expect with the Harkonnens, because Vladimir Harkonnen is the same as well, once again played by Stellan Skarsgård. And of course, since, he plays a bigger role in that he interacts with the Emperor and all that, you do see a lot more of him in this. And then, of course, the newest addition, to the Harkonnens is Fade Rotha, played by Austin Butler, doing his best kind of not to look like Austin. It feels kind of like at times that Butler's performance here is trying to echo Skarsgård's performance, like almost like he's trying to do an impression of it. Like Dave Bautista just kind of like in his own world, just being like this hot-headed, short-fused guy who just wants to murder everyone, and Butler's performance as Fade is more, it's a little bit more subtle. He's more violent, he's a little bit more animalistic, but he kind of has like this quiet, sinister nature to him. Even though like they, like the Bene Gesserits basically do like a psychological profile on him at one point, about how like he's sexually frustrated, he's got mommy issues. So very, very interesting, complex character that I think Butler does well with, even though, like I said, most of the time it feels like he's just trying to copy Skarsgård. As always, like he's like afraid that, well, it could be just direction, but it feels like he's just trying to match Vladimir Harkonnen so that it makes sense that Vladimir would favor Fade, even though Fade's a lot more contained than Raban. Other additions to this film that we didn't see in part one is we actually do get to see the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, who was not in part one and is crucial to orchestrating everything that goes down on Arrakis, with making sure the Harkonnens take over, with assassinating the Duke Leto Atreides. So yeah, it feels like he's a crucial character, and he should have like a very dominating performance. And you have Christopher Walken, who actually really nails it here. Like I said, not a lot of time spent with him, but just enough where like he has this imposing nature to him, where he has to say so little and just kind of like and dominate the few scenes he has. Like there's a great scene where he approaches Paul at one point and confesses to murdering the Duke, and basically says that we had to take him out because your dad was weak. And it's cold-blooded, and it works so well with Walken's delivery here, which I should probably mention this too. Like I did see this at the Alamo Drafthouse, and they always put these like cute little previews but before like the film comes up that relate to the big movie that you're going to see. And in this case, they had Christopher Walken, in the music video where he's flying around the room, and they have like, of course, the lyrics like walk without rhythm, don't attract the worm. So yeah, just a fun little comment. I had a feeling they'd probably do that when I went into the film. So also playing Shaddam's daughter, Princess Aurelian, is Florence Pugh, who she doesn't dominate the film as much for being more of a narrator, but there's just enough used of her where you can kind of see like the similar aspects of fear and skepticism that Chani has. Like it very much feels like Villeneuve is kind of like tapping into a lot of the intelligence of these characters and finding actors that can bring out more to them, so that they're not just like these simplistic people off to the side, just kind of being more like passengers in Paul's story. So yeah, those are the all the big reveals here of like the rest of the cast that's coming back. Now in terms of like how the way the film looks, like I said, I love the world building in the first film, and we get to spend a lot of time within like the deserts of Arrakis. Just hanging out with just Paul and Stilgar and Chani and all the Fremen, and it's beautiful to watch. Just like the vast landscapes. The biggest, I think a lot of people are going to describe the film this way, is that it's very much a war epic, because there's a lot of scenes where you're just looking out on these vast vistas and you see like these legions of armies, and you see like the sandworms coming about, and in particular one of the greatest scenes in the film, like there's so many moments that I absolutely love, but I think probably one of the best, and I think this is Phil New's favorite scene as well, is the scene where Paul is riding the sandworm. Now it's like, this is a great sequence because even though there's not a lot of description in the book, it is one of those sequences where he does prove himself to the Fremen in a big way. So it feels like a lot is weighted on that scene, and there's not a whole lot to go on from the book, where it's up to whoever is directing it, the adaptation, to make it work, to make it feel like the Fremen deeply accept Paul, and that taming the sandworm was like a big deal and a huge rite of passage. And the way that it's filmed, with like the tight close-ups, and just like the sand just shooting at Paul as he's like struggling to hang on to a sandworm, is just it's intense, it's exciting, and by the time like he actually gets up to ride the worm, everyone, like all the Fremen are cheering for him, and like the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer's cranked up. It's got like a little bit, what I feel like is a little bit of a nod to Toto in the original film, which is like having like the guitars blazing in that moment, which makes it so much more epic. That it's just such a great scene that that I felt, that almost kind of like that same level of relief that Skilgar has when he's watching this. He's like, yes, this is just like it was written, like almost like kind of like he knew it was going to happen. In a similar sense, I kind of knew that Villeneuve would be able to pull off that sequence in particular. And just watching it come to life is just such, not even just like relief. It's just like, that comforting moment where, like, yes, this story is in good hands, and it's great to watch it unfold here. So yeah, we do get to explore a little bit more of the other planets and their houses. Like we do get to see Shaddam the Fourth's planet, where it's very much like a green paradise. It's beautiful, it's luscious, and then you compare that to like the planet of the Harkonnens, in which color is just drained from the outside world. Like it's just like pitch black and white everywhere, like this huge stark contrast, which makes it so like bold and just more intense to watch, like the big arena battle that they have for like the time that we get to see Fade introduced in that sequence. Yeah, just the way that everything is set up here is just massive and wondrous. I watched this in Dolby Vision the first time I saw it, and it was just astounding. Like it has like this effect that that I felt not just with part one, but also with Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049, where it did feel like like I wasn't just watching like the sci-fi adaptation. It felt like I was felt like I was on another, as corny as it is to say, it felt like you were someplace else, like you lost yourself within this story, within this other world, and all the characters who occupy it, and just like the rest of the world just disappears at that moment. It's that great moment that you love having within film, where just like the rest of the world just dissolves away, and you're just locked in within like this astounding fantasy that's just epic and beautiful, and you just want to just stay within for so long. Like, I mean, this film is like 2.5 hours, maybe roughly getting close to 3, and it just breezes by. Like, and not just because like Villeneuve covers a lot of ground in the book, but also just because of like the tight direction, and how there's like a purpose to every line of dialogue, every vision that Paul has, every astoundingly weird moment, like when Jessica is communicating with her unborn child, when the water of life is extracted, when all the weird Bene Gesserit clothing is donned, and just every odd thing, it feels like has a place here. And it's not just, look, here's all this weird sci-fi stuff that you've come to expect from Dune. It's like, no, it's, if you've never read the book, this is easy to get locked within, because it feels like there is a progression to the story, and there's a reason for each character, and each weird and wild moment that takes place on Arrakis and off Arrakis within like the second part of the novel. Now, of course, like there's a few things they do change from the novel, like in particular, without giving too much away. They don't include like the time jump, which is a little odd, because like you would think like, with the amount of time between part 1 and part 2, you would have some time there. But no, like since they were kind of, zooming right into part 2, they don't have like the time skip, which honestly is fine. Like, cause I think that it gives the film more time to focus a lot more on Paul's ascension, rather than just like catching up after the fact. Especially with all like the baggage that would come with introducing Chani, and introducing a few other characters who are kind of omitted or a little bit reduced within this story. But I feel like that works for what they're setting up here, because like I said, this is clearly going to be setting up for Doom Messiah, and because like they continue to show you these visions of the anxiety that Paul has about his rise to power, and how, like, he's just, pushes it aside. And he only sees himself becoming like the triumphant hero of Arrakis, while Chani is seeing something much darker grow and fester. So while everyone else is just kind of like, the Fremen are just like, yes, Arrakis is going to be ours, and we're going to be able to start this holy war. Chani's got some reservations about this big holy war that you're going to start with all, like, the other houses that are going to be competing for Arrakis now that, kind of everything has changed by the end of the film. And, even if we don't, I'm pretty sure, like, we are going to get an adaptation of Dune Messiah at this point. But even if we don't, just, like, everything that is set up here, and just the tone, and, like, this brooding sense of, fearing destiny, and focusing on the dangers of, like, fundamentalism, and how easily people can be manipulated and warped into doing whatever you want, even if it is for the benefit of their people in that moment. Watching these kind of this rise to power, especially with the way that Villeneuve shoots the beginning and the end of the film. There's almost a little bit of a palindromic nature to how the Harkonnens are framed, and how the Fremen are framed, in which, like, the Harkonnens, they wipe out the Atreides, and then the Fremen, they wipe out the Harkonnen. And just watching, like, the clash there, and just, like, most of the characters not questioning this, and Chani being kind of the only one who can see, like, the writing on the wall here, and Jessica more or less kind of, like, standing back and just letting, the Bene Gesserit lore unfold, was just so fascinating to me. So yeah, it's just like, I having seen this film twice, I'm still in love with it. I feel like it's definitely, I mean, not a lot of competition. There's the David Lynch version of Dune, and then there's, the Sci-Fi Channel TV miniseries, which, again, another little promotion for Alamo here, but before the film, they actually did a recap that synced up the 84 film, the 2000 miniseries, and the 2021 part 1 together, and you can kind of, like, compare and contrast. And when you see them all combined together, and that might seem, might seem a little bit unfair to compare them, but I mean, it's the same adaptation. So, when comparing them all together, this is easily the best adaptation of Dune by a mile. So yeah, like, between, like, part 1 and part 2, to make this, like, complete, like, roughly 6-hour version of the first book is just astounding. Like, the casting has been great since, like, day one. And everyone brings their A game here. The production design is amazing. Villeneuve puts a lot of work into realizing this world, giving it amazing world building. Hans Zimmer's music is just to die for. It's just like, oh, it's just as amazing as it was in the first film. And, I just love it here. So yeah, what else can I say? Villeneuve did pretty much what I expected him to do with the second part of Dune, and a whole lot more. So yeah, I absolutely love this film. So Dune Part 2 is currently playing in theaters everywhere right now. Try to see it if you can. Like, it's selling out everywhere. So, because I think the opening box office was like 81 million? Which is, like, I think it's roughly twice the amount that Part 1 made. It was pretty awesome. Amazing. All right. Now, all right, let's talk about the other film that's in theaters. For how long, I do not know. Okay. All right. Let me get my notes up here for Madam Web. All right. Okay. And here we go in 3, 2, 1. So, Madam Web is the latest superhero film from Sony's Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. You know, the one with Venom and who else? Morbius and Kraven will be coming soon, but apparently no Spider-Man. Which, you know, I would think, you know, I would like to say that, you know, you don't need Spider-Man to do these villains, right? I would like to say that, you know, because you're not bound by that comic book lore, you could do something more interesting with it. Which is weird because like the way that like Madam Web has pretty much proceeded the exact same way that Morbius has, which is that it feels like a film that is distant from like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and allowed to kind of like be its own thing. And yet it just feels like a bland, stale superhero film with a character, with a protagonist who's gifted like these incredible powers, but doesn't seem all that interested in them. At least that's not the tone that comes across here. Because watching like Morbius go from like this guy who had a debilitating disease, who could barely move, and then finds like this vampire power and is able to become super agile and he can fly and do all this cool stuff. And he just seems bored with it all. And that's very much the case with Madam Web. Within Madam Web, you have Dakota Johnson playing Cassie Webb, who is this woman she's a paramedic within New York, and she discovers that she has clairvoyant powers, where she can predict the future. And, this could be a fascinating power, but I think the problem is just like, before she even discovers these powers, she's kind of a bit of a dull character. Just like she has these very like bland, dry deliveries and these attempts at humor that just fall flat on their face so many times that by the time where we get to the moment where she discovers she has the ability to see the future, you think, okay, this might be exciting. This might, zap her out of the doldrums of her life, and how she's able to, kind of like push aside all her emotions and her past and the fact that she doesn't really have that great of a relation. Well, her mother died during childbirth, and she kind of blames her mother because she went off to the jungle and it's a whole thing. We don't have to get too much into it, but basically she's kind of a boring character. But then she gets like these clairvoyant powers. Then you think something more exciting would be happening. She'd be like, "Oh, I could predict the future. This is astounding." It's like, and you'd expect to have her like kind of like these shocked reactions, like, what did I just see, and how can I prevent this, and how do I save these people? Because she eventually learns that there are 3 teenagers who will eventually become a version of Spider-Woman. And this isn't a spoiler, which I'll explain in a moment, but she realizes they're in danger because they're being targeted by Ezekiel, the villain of this film, who is played by Tahar Rahim. And he has a relationship with Cassie's mother, and he also has the same clairvoyant powers as well. Now, here's the biggest problem with this film, is that it doesn't really have all that much excitement for the type of superhero story that it's trying to stage here. In particular, mostly because remember when I said that the Spider-Woman reveal was like, the big thing that was going to happen with these 3 teenagers of Maddie, Anya, and Julia, the 3 teenagers who will become the Spider-Woman. It's not really a spoiler because it's revealed very, very early in the film. Like, Ezekiel has this vision that he's going to be killed by these 3 teenagers, and he thinks, I got to kill them first before they kill me in the future. Even though it seems like it's a long way off, he just wants to get ahead of the curve here, which kind of stinks because like it's the vision that he has. Like you see these teenagers in their full Spider-Woman getup, and it's teasing this film that will probably never come, because like this is Madam Web is supposed to be set in like 2005, I believe, like the mid 2000s. So in order for like this film to like age up to like the current Sony Spider-Man free universe, it's going to be like what, 20 years before they get to that age where they could interact with Morbius, unless they just recast, which kind of seems like it's a bad deal for the teenage actresses here of Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor. Like, kind of a raw deal for them. Like, this is a film where they get to play Spider-Woman, where they're on the poster as Spider-Woman, and they spend a collective time of maybe 30 seconds of future visions where they're in the costumes. And I will give the film this, to the film's credit, at least for the majority of the film, when they're just kind of kind of like just trying to fend for their lives and not be killed by Ezekiel and following around Webb throughout all this. They they actually they look good. They got like some nice outfits on. They kind of have that that attire that seems suitable for like a horror film, which got me kind of excited because they kind of like that little bit of like that kind of like slash, like they kind of look like characters from like a slasher film, and that kind of got me a little bit excited because Ezekiel's targeting these kids. So he's going to be coming after to kill them. So, maybe you might have a little bit of a happy death day to you type of vibe here. And, this was kind of like the thing I was kind of hoping for with Morbius, where it's like, oh, maybe they could make it like a slasher horror film and have Webb trying to come to save the day, but, being terrified that she might not be able to save everyone, which keeps witnessing these slashings and these teenagers being brutally murdered. And it's like, that could actually be a really cool angle if the film had some faith to make it that. Instead, it becomes like a very much a first draft type of like superhero film where there's so much unaccounted for information that really becomes distracting when it really shouldn't. Like the film should be good enough where I'm not paying attention to stuff like, wait, Cassie's still driving around in a taxi she stole while the police are looking for her. I shouldn't be questioning that. I should be more excited about like the chase she has with Ezekiel when she comes to save the teenagers, but I can't because the acting is poor and like the writing is bizarre. Like at one point, like there are several points in the film in which Cassie will just abandon the three teenagers so that she can go learn more about her mother and her powers. I mean, and I understand like that's a concern for her, but like her grand plan to like, go back to her apartment, while she's on the lam, to find out some more information about her powers is to leave the three teenagers alone in the woods with no like tent or food or any means to keep themselves alive. And immediately after she does that, before she leaves, like she just leaves the teenagers there. She just like shouts back to them twice, "Hey, don't do anything stupid," which is kind of funny when you realize in that moment she's doing the stupidest thing she could do, which is like, if you want to protect these three teenagers, the worst thing you could do is leave them alone in the woods with no supplies and nothing to defend themselves with. And on that level, I don't want to create a false impression here, because if I describe the film that way, it makes it sound like it's so bad it's good, but it's not. It's just as boring and dull and flavorless as Morbius was. And I feel like some people are going to try to play that up with Madame Web, because like I know that Sony for a time tried to play Morbius up as like, oh, it's so bad that it's so good. We're gonna, because they had those memes about it's Morbin time, so now we're gonna shove it back in the theaters and see how well it does. Maybe it's gonna be so bad it'll be a great midnight hit, and it didn't, because it was bland and dumb, and the people who were the people who were embracing the memes obviously hadn't seen the film, or they had no interest in going back to watch it, because there was nothing all that interesting about the film. And the same with Madame Web. Like the performances are kind of bland. Like I will give some credit to Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor. They're all right. They're given just enough time to have some character here, but Johnson is just kind of flat in this film. She's so dead with her deliveries, and I can only imagine like that she was probably instructed to kind of act this way, like hoping that the humor would be more organic, where she's not trying too hard for laughs. But even the scenes where it is clear like they're trying to make a joke, it does not land at all. It's just like, oh god, this is not working so much. Not to mention, like, her powers are kind of bizarre. The editing's all over the place. Like I said, there's because of the clairvoyant visions, we're given all the information early about the clairvoyant powers, not to mention the history of Cassie's mother. So Cassie grows up hating her mother because she thinks that, there was no purpose to her going out of the jungle, even though we're let in on it early, what went down in there. So most of the film, you're just kind of watching all the rest of the characters play catch up. and it's kind of dull because there's no aspect of surprise to it where you fully get engaged with it. So like I know that there are some people who are trying to promote this film as being so bad that it's funny, and it really isn't. Like it's just it was bland as Morbius. I will give it credit. It was more like visually appealing to watch. Like I said, I like the look of the teenagers, kind of having a little bit of a slasher vibe. There's a little bit of playfulness with like the clairvoyance, but not as much as I feel like they could be, and they're a little bit like wishy-washy on the aspects of the powers. Not to mention they try to crack a few jokes about it at a few points, and they don't land here. Not to mention you have Adam Scott in this film, who feels like he should be like, comedic backup, and he can't do anything in this film. He can't bring that much comedy to it. Like he's trying to have like kind of like a little bit of a dry wit to him, but there are a few scenes where it's like you could kind of get used to him as a character if you had a few more scenes with him. But when you compare his dry wit to Johnson's dry delivery, it's just like, oh, this is not working here. Not to mention all the technicalities of like the ADR is so poor in this film, where it's like you could tell like at the last minute they were like forcing in some extra dialogue into the soundtrack just because I felt like they didn't, probably because they didn't have enough faith in the audience for certain scenes to read out the information that was being shown to them. It feels like a mess, like a film that's been retooled to hell and back, made into more of a corporate product, which becomes a lot more apparent with like the blatant promotion of Pepsi in this film. Like this is on a level that I hadn't seen since like Michael Bay, where like there's a scene where early on where Johnson's at a party and she's holding a Pepsi can, but she's holding it in such a weird way that like her fingers are like, she's holding it kind of like this to make sure that her fingers are not covering up the Pepsi logo so that you can see the Pepsi, clearly that it's a Pepsi in every single scene that she's holding the can. Not to mention later on, the Grand Showdown has it at a factory in which a giant Pepsi sign crushes the villain. It's like, oh my, this, yeah, this isn't working. This is, oh God, I want this, like I said, I would like to see, kind of like this horror aspect that was teased a little bit. Maybe have like, like if you're going to do kind of like, a Happy Death Day to You type thing, do that. If you're going to make it a Spider-Woman origin story, do that. But it just feels like this bland mishmash of ideas that have been like forced through like the corporate meat churner. And it turns out just this mess of a film. It very much feels like a mid-2000s superhero film, which is very fitting that they set the film in this time frame. Because back then it felt like superhero films are all over the place, trying to figure out what works, and we're just kind of like shooting around in the dark, trying to make a film that audiences would accept, but also trying not to make it look too comic booky while still having comic book aspects of it. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work. It's the worst kind of bad movie. It's a bad movie that is not funny enough, not bizarre enough to be enjoyable the way that I'm sure like Sony and a few other people are going to be trying to promote it. It's just like a bland and messy Marvel movie that just doesn't work. Once again, proving that this Spider-Man free Spider-Man universe is just not working. I don't know whether it's just the corporate choices or the executive meddling or the how much control the directors have, but this is just not working, and it's definitely not making me excited for the Craven film and to see where that fits into this universe. So yeah, Madam Web is a mess. So Madam Web will probably be in theaters for a little bit. We'll see. All right. My voice is going out a little bit. But I think I have one left in me. I think we can get through the three that we're going to cover here. All right. Let me get my notes up here. And here we go with Problemista. All right. I just... Shoot. Pardon me. I just realized that while I was turning in my chair, I had knocked down like a whole bunch of like screener merch that I got this year. I guess I might as well show it now that I brought it up. So, just a moment here. So this is what I knocked down. I can't find a place to put it. This is David Fincher's The Killer, and it's just a wonderful painting too. I love it because like it doesn't even have like, it's not like a poster because it doesn't even have like the killer, the title of the killer on it. It's just like this. Just wonderful. So I got to find something interesting to do with it. Okay. Let's finish this up here. Okay. Problemista. In 3, 2, 1. So, Problemista is a new dramatic comedy starring Julio Juarez, who also writes and directs this film. And it's a very odd little film. I mean, it's an A24 film, so you expect them to be a little bit odd. It kind of has like, that same tone that you've come to expect with their films, kind of like with like Dream Scenario from last year. But this is kind of like a fascinating film because it's filled with like odd characters and bizarre, surreal sequences that are never like fully explained, which I kind of dug because then it kind of like, it feels a lot more trippy rather than easily explained. But there's another interesting dynamic to this film that I really want to focus on, but I think I should give the film its stay in court first before I explain what makes the film so fascinating. So the film is about this young man, Alejandro, played by Juarez, who is an immigrant who has come to stay in New York and is hoping to strike it big as a toy designer. The problem is he's tried to pitch himself to Hasbro. Unfortunately, his toy ideas they seem too weird that Hasbro wouldn't take a shot on them. Specifically, he focuses on toys where the dynamic is not so much about, play, but almost kind of like learning like a moral lesson through the weirdest ways. Like they have like, I think like they showcase a lot of his designs, but they're weird stuff like a toy car where the tires slowly deflate over time. There's another one where he has like Cabbage Patch dolls, but they all have like anxiety about stuff they put on social media. So stuff that's meant to be relatable, but is still weird. And that's kind of like the vibe for the rest of the film because it does present stuff that is strange, that is weird, that does feel like that feels like you can't tell the difference between like fantasy and reality at several points, but it's all stuff that's relatable. And that's what makes it so fascinating on that level. So while Alejandro is struggling for work in New York, he's just gotten fired from his last job at a cryogenic facility, and he finds himself trying to get a new job with this woman Elizabeth, played by Tilda Swinton. And she is just a frantic, messy woman who is trying to preserve the legacy of her husband, who was cryogenically frozen because he had a cancer that couldn't be treated, and he was a bit of an artist. He's played by RZA, which you get to see a little bit of him in the film. But he had this whole thing about wanting to paint eggs, just nothing but painting eggs in the most like kind of like playful and strange way that's kind of adorable at times. So Elizabeth's whole deal is she wants to set up a gallery by reacquiring all of his paintings and kind of like making this big tribute to his legacy. And Elizabeth kind of like, tells Alejandro, like, look, if you help me out with this, I'll help you sign some papers that'll help you keep you in the US so you can keep pursuing your dream of wanting to develop toys. So they actually form a kind of a very interesting bond here. It has its hills and valleys, and Alejandro is still struggling for money during that time because Elizabeth doesn't really pay Alejandro, so he struggles for work, taking the oddest of jobs, renting out his room to people, just browsing Craigslist and feeling like there's nothing that he can do to, maintain his citizenship, while also wanting to be independent. Like, there are several points where, like, his mother keeps calling him saying, hey, do you need money? I'll help you out. He's like, no, I can do this. I can do it on my own. Don't worry about it. I can handle this. When in reality, he's struggling. He's struggling to find work. He's struggling to connect with people and just, struggling to maneuver his way through the world, similar to the way that Elizabeth does. Now, here is where I find the film most intriguing. So this film becomes way more fascinating if you look at it on the level of Alejandro representing autism and Elizabeth representing ADHD. Because they never specifically say that they have these diagnoses. But you can kind of like see it in the way that they interact. Like, Alejandro is very laser focused on his goals. He becomes, he's a little bit more reserved. He's not emotionless, but he's still, struggling to prove himself and finds it hard to do at several times, and tries to find little ways to cope with reality, and the kind of like the ways that he walks around and like the way that he, just asserts himself in that way. Whereas with Elizabeth, she's all over the place. She gets lost in thought several times. She can't let stuff go. She's, she has like a lot of attachment to stuff. Her purse is a mess. And she's, she can barely maintain like a conversation because she gets frantically lost and gets kind of like scared and angry with herself for not being able to, keep everything together in her life. And she relies on old technology. She doesn't update it because she constantly gets distracted by everything. And just watching the film in that aspect where Alejandro has autism and Elizabeth has ADHD, the way that they come together is just kind of beautiful because like Alejandro is able to see the side of Elizabeth that no one else can see. Like, even within Alejandro's mind, like within like his vision, in his like little trippy visions, he pretty much sees her as like a monster. But it's a monster that he wants to kind of like understand and try to, connect with. Like, there's a beautiful moment where Elizabeth and Alejandro have just come out of a place where they're trying to get the paintings, and Elizabeth has lost her keys in her purse, and she's like, "Oh, where are my keys? Did they fall down? Oh, I'm pretty sure that person there stole it. Where can my keys be?" And like Alejandro comes to the rescue and is basically like, "Well, why don't we just empty your purse one by one, and we can find the keys?" And he kind of like talks Elizabeth through that in a way that's not meant to be condescending, but just kind of like working it out the same way that he would work it out. And watching them connect on that level was just, it was so cute and like, and just warm and very comforting, while at the same time being still playfully silly and absurd with it. Like at one point, like he looks through a purse and he's like, oh, he finds like a huge chain of keys. It's like, oh, is it one of these? Like, no, those aren't the keys. And it's like, oh, why? Doesn't really question why there are more keys. Just like that's Elizabeth's nature. There's a lot of bizarre sequences in this film. Like, I love how Craigslist is represented by like this almost kind of like Bacchus type, like dreamlike figure, played by Larry Owens, who's just like, come back to Craigslist, have you? It just like spouts off like all these like jobs and stuff you can buy. And there's even like a few surprising casting within here. Like you have Greta Lee off of Past Lives, having a small role in here of someone who has a bit of a history with Elizabeth and comes to terms with it. You have Isabella Rossellini being the narrator here, which is pretty fun. Small role, but still a fun one. And just like the weird places that this film goes to, and just doesn't relent at times. And it's not just within like the fantasy visions that Alejandro has, even though those are some of like the funniest moments in the film. Particularly, there's a scene where he's pleading on the phone for like an employee of Bank of America to help him realize that it's not fair how he was charged for trying to maintain his account, and that it's now in the red, and that there's nothing he can do about it. And just like, and he envisions himself being trapped under rocks, and this Bank of America employee just watching him, and he's like, And he's just saying like, I'm not even asking you to fix anything. I just want you to acknowledge that that this is not right and that this should not be happening to me right now. That's all I want. And then he just envisions the Bank of America employee just saying, I stand with Bank of America, and shooting him in the face. And just like I said, it's that weird fantastical nature, but stuff that feels relatable. Even by like the time the film gets to its conclusion, it has the strangest epilogue. But it surprisingly works. It maintains like the weirdness and the odd nature of the comedy within the film. Particularly the way that how Alejandro is like being terrified of the fact that that Elizabeth wants to use FileMaker Pro and he has no idea how to use it, and then he realizes nobody does. Just wonderful little humor like that, and just not being afraid to go to all the weird places and embrace that weirdness, I think makes this film works so well. Where even if you don't see like the comparison to like autism and ADHD, it's still a sweet film. It's still got its bizarre and fun, trippy moments. It goes into some bizarre and dark places here and there, and it's just visually wonderful to look at times. So yeah. Problemista, I feel like it for a lot of people, it's going to be a bit of a messy film because it definitely is all over the place a lot. But like I said, that might be on purpose just for how like these characters are framed as not quite having their life all together and always feeling like they're a little bit of an outsider, which is an aspect I absolutely appreciated in this film. Where it's as weird as it is heartwarming, if that makes any sense. I just love Problemista. So that's Problemista. That film is currently in limited release in a few theaters and will be releasing in a wider release in theaters on March 29th, I believe. So at the end of the month. So mark your calendars for that one. Okay, so yes, I got through it. All right, let's have a little outro music here. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's program. We reviewed Dune Part 2, the second half of Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of the first Dune novel by Frank Herbert. What can I say? I'm a sucker for the Dune book. Villeneuve did right by it. He does just as well in Part 2 as he did in Part 1. Maybe, I'm fairly confident to say I like Part 2 a lot more than Part 1. And I loved Part 1, mind you. I think it was like number 3 on my list of the best films of 2021. So, there you go. We reviewed Madame Web, Sony's latest Marvel film in a Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man, and it's a dud. Just as much as Morbius. So, at least Sony's remaining consistent. Madame Web is just as dull and boring as Morbius was, so. But then we also reviewed Problemista, a strange little film about, people struggling to connect with each other, and it has trippy, bizarre humor, and if you look at it from the angle of the meetings of the minds of autism and ADHD forming a bond and a friendship, it's a wonderful film. That will be it's in theaters right now and will be expanding later at the end of the month. So of the films we reviewed, I would say go see Dune Part 2 right now, if you can. Reserve your tickets if you can. It's sold out everywhere. And then later on this month, consider going to see Problemista. So those are all the reviews I have right now. If you'd like to read some of my reviews, you can go over to movieswithmark.com, where I've got reviews of Madame Web and Dune Part 2, whatever, get it for a minute. Problemista I'll have up on there later. Over at Film Inquiry, I do have my review of Madame Web, will be posted soon. And on Twin Cities Geek, I do have the review of Dune Part 2 there as well. So, I will be back in about 2 weeks for more movie reviews, and we'll have a lot more to cover. We've got a new Kung Fu Panda film coming up, and we've got a few others, which I can't remember at the moment. But definitely Kung Fu Panda 4 will be in the future. And then who knows? Who knows what I'll cover? Could be something early. Could be something I don't even know that we even have on the radar at this point. We'll see. You'll have to tune in next time, so be sure to like and subscribe if you would like to stay up to date on the latest movies. So, until next time, I will see you next time. So have a Mega Force week, everybody. There you go.